So guys, now we will try to understand what is while loop in Java. Okay, so while loop in Java is basically another flow control statement which helps us in executing a block of code in a repetitive manner until and unless one condition is true. Okay, so when we want to execute a set of steps or a set of instructions in a repetitive manner until and unless one particular condition is true, while loop can be used. Okay, so basically this is the flow of while loop. This is the entry point, and once we enter into the while loop, we first check that the condition, for example here, the condition A is true, then the body of the while loop will get executed, and again the condition will be checked, and if it is true, then again the body will be executed, and once the condition A becomes false, the while loop will terminate. So this is the termination point. Okay, so as we saw the execution of for loop, so basically while loop and for loop both are alternatives for each other. While loop can be rewritten as for loop, and for loop can be rewritten as while loop, but there are some differences between for loop and a while loop, and we can try to understand those. So the first difference between for loop and while loop is like, in for loop is used basically when we know the number of iterations, the number of repetitions in advance that we need to perform. Okay, so we know how many times we need to execute a loop. Okay, so we will just have a look on the for loop also. So this is our for loop, and here we have two more steps apart from the condition check. Okay, one is the initialization and one is the post expression. Okay, so basically three steps are there which we need to perform in a for loop and to determine the number of iterations that we need to perform. Okay, so basically we'll have a look on the practical example of a for loop. So this is our practical example of for loop. Okay, so here this is our first initialization step, then this is our condition check, and this is the post expression. So how many times this for loop will be executed is basically mentioned here. So we are initializing the counter, the I is our counter of the loop, and we will be incrementing I until and unless it is less than 6. Okay, so how many times this for loop will be executed? 6 times, because we are incrementing the counter until I is less than 6. Okay, so here in some manner we know the number of iterations that we need to perform, but in case of a while loop, so basically we'll have a look on the practical example of while loop. So this is our practical example and this is our syntax. So here we have just mentioned one condition. Okay, so this is the basic program that we have implemented for while loop. So what is happening here, we have created one object of scanner class. Okay, so this is our scanner class object. Okay, and we are taking the input from the console. Okay, so when we want to take the input from console, we can use the scanner class object. Okay, with the help of scanner class next line method, we are taking the input from the console and storing it into a input variable, that is a string input variable. Okay, and then we are checking the condition that input is equals to test. So until and unless the entered input from the console is equals to test, this while loop body will get executed. Okay, and once this input is not equals to test, then the while loop will terminate. So basically we have not mentioned the number of iterations, how many times we need to iterate over these set of instructions. Okay, we have not mentioned the number of iterations, the number of repetitions in advance here. Okay, so this is one of the difference between while loop and a for loop. Okay, and we are only dependent on this particular condition. So this is basically the difference between for loop and while loop. Okay, So now we'll just try to go through the final point in the doc. So although the for loop and while loop are different, those loops can be rewritten as an alternative for each other. A while loop can be rewritten as a for loop, and a for loop can be rewritten as a while loop. Okay, so we'll now execute the practical example of while loop. Okay, so what we have done, again I'll just tell, in this program we are taking the input and checking that the input is equals to test, and then we are executing the set of instructions again. Then in the example 2, so we have another example here, that is for getting the maximum number from a set of numbers. Okay, so here we have an array. We have defined one array with 5 integers. Okay, and we have to find which one is the maximum from this set of integers. Okay, so how we are finding that? We are finding that with the help of while loop. Okay, so we will be iterating over the set of integers. So we will be iterating over the set of integers, and verifying that if my current integer is greater than the max. So what we have done, we have initialized the maximum integer to the first index position. Okay, so the first index position is containing value 10. So we have by default mentioned here that our maximum value is 10. But once we go into this while loop, we will check that whether my current value, when we will be iterating over the array with the help of this index, here I is our index, and we have initialized it to position 1. Why position 1? Because we know that there are 5 integers in the array, and we have already initialized the position 0 value to the integer max. Okay, so that's why we are starting from the position 1, because we have already utilized the position 0. Okay, so what will happen inside this while loop? Basically we will iterate over 5 integers. Okay, and what we will check, that if my current integer is greater than the max. Okay, we have by default a value for max, that is 10 at index 0 of the array. Okay, so once we move to the next element of the array, that is 324, what will happen? 324 will be basically greater than 10. Okay, so what will happen? The value of max will get changed to 324. Then again the I will increment. Okay, so what will happen? I will increment, and earlier I was equals to 1, now I will become 2, that is the index 2, and the value will become 45 for the current value of array. Okay, now what will happen? 45 will be compared with 324. Okay, because max value now is 324, and then the swap will not happen because 324 is greater than the 45, and here the 45 will be less than the 324, so the values will not change. And then again 90 will be compared with 324, and again this condition will not pass. Okay, and then finally 9808 will get compared with the max value. Okay, so 9808 here will become uh, greater than 324, and this condition will again get satisfied. Okay, so the final value of the max will become 9808. Okay, we'll quickly now execute our first example in a debug manner. Okay, so what is happened? The console is expecting us to enter some input with the help of scanner class. This is our first example where we are taking the input from console and iterating over the while loop. Okay, so I will enter test because we want to enter inside this while loop. Okay, so this condition needs to be satisfied first to enter into the while loop. Okay, so now I have entered. Now my flow will now move to the next. Okay, so now this flow has moved to this position, that is sys out enter some text again. Okay, so now I will iterate. Okay, I will remove these debug points now because we want to continuously execute this program. Okay, so now I will again enter some text, that is test. Okay, so again this statement got executed, and then again we are inside the while loop because we entered the text as test. Now I will enter something else, that is quit. Let's say quit. So now what happened? Because we entered quit, that is not equals to test, hence the while loop got broke. Okay, so the while loop got broke and the scanner class object got closed. Okay, and then this flow of execution came to this line. Okay, by going through these lines, the because this is a debug point, that's why this is stopped here. Okay, now what will happen in the example 2, we have initialized an array of 5 integers and we will be checking whether which is the greatest value, and we will be printing the max value. Okay, so I will execute this program now step by step. Okay, now the I is equals to 1. Okay, due to this initialization. Now what will happen? The array of I will contain value 324 and max will contain value 10. Okay, because of this initialization. Okay, now max will become 324 because the current value is 324 and that is greater than max. Okay, so now max has become 324. Now in a repetitive manner, this condition will fail because 45 and 90 are smaller than 324. Okay, now twice the condition has failed. Now what will happen? The index has become 4. That is this position. This is index 0, 1, 2, 3, and this is index 4. Okay. Now what will happen? The current value is 9808 and which is greater than the max, and max was equals to 324 earlier. Now it will change to 9808. Okay. So finally all iterations got completed successfully and now the max is 9808. Okay, so this was something about for while loop. Okay, we'll see now in the next video how the binary search works.